and welcome to the very first episode of Off-Grid Journey. I am your host, Drew Lamb. Yep, I'm the Aquaponics guy, and I'm also the co-host of Double Cross Radio. And this is a brand new show. As many of you know, Off-Grid Journey is a project that our producer Jules put together a few years ago, and it has been a Facebook page and a budding website since then. And there's a few of us that contribute to it, myself, my friend and co-host Chuck Horton, and a few others on there. Share ideas about off-grid living and survival, sustainability. And I was on Jules' show a few weeks ago before the first cup, and we were talking about gardening and farming and aquaponics. And after the show, we got to talking and thought it would be a cool idea to spin Off-Grid Journey into an actual show. So this is our first episode. I wanted to cover aquaponics for our very first show, and I had invited my aquaponics guru, Murray Hallam, to come on. And I have yet to make contact with Murray. He had agreed to come on, and it's 4 a.m. in Australia right now, and he was going to get up early and get on, but maybe his alarm clock didn't go off. And so I'm hoping that he'll drop in and pay us a visit. But otherwise, we're going to get into aquaponics today. And if Murray drops in, that'll be great because he knows way more than I do, has much more experience than I do. I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and I actually have a commercial aquaponics farm called Pyramid Pure Foods. It's an urban farm that's located in Ashland, Oregon. And I built it, I modeled it after Will Allen's Growing Power urban farm. I was really impressed with what Will Allen had done with so little resources. And so when I started designing my farm, I was really looking to Will Allen just because of his overall ethos. I know a lot of people in aquaponics, and a lot of them have science and chemistry backgrounds, and very analytical people, very detail-minded, and and some of this stuff gets very complicated. There's a lot going on biologically and chemically when you're growing vegetables and other plants in a system like this. But Will's attitude was that you just roll up your sleeves and get down to work and you do it, and you're going to grow something. And and I have a background in brewing. I've won a few awards for brewing beer, and I took that approach to it. It's it's a lot like that. You're moving liquids from one container to another. You've got living things in the system that you're relying upon in brewing. It's yeast, and with aquaponics, you're relying upon bacteria, and I'll get to that some more in just a bit here. But Will's approach was you just start building things, and I was trying to figure out what kind of a system I wanted to put together. I was working with a friend of mine, and he'd constructed a polybarrel system that was modeled after the designs of a company up in Portland, Oregon called Portland Purple Water. And so he put that system together. If you go on my YouTube channel for Pyramid Pure Foods, I made a little video a couple of years ago showing that working. And it's still functioning to this day. It's actually on my patio right now. And I've made some modifications to it. I actually have 3 polybarrels right now that hold the fish, and then I have 4 half barrels that contain my plants. And I've got bluegill fingerlings in there right now that I've been raising since November. I believe I put them in there. And right now I just replanted. I've been growing kale and chard in there, and right now I've got kale, chard, basil, celery, and spinach. So I started out with that system, and then I wanted to build a bigger system. So I rented some space in a building that I'd managed for a client of mine for several years, an old warehouse building that had been used for food production. And I started building a system much like Growing Powers, using recycled lumber. and I wanted to take advantage of the vertical space, and that's one of the advantages of farming with aquaponics or hydroponics, is that you could farm on multiple levels. And so I have a lot of friends that are contractors, and they donated wood to the project, and we started building out a multi-level system. It's a 3-level system with tanks on the bottom and troughs on the top. Tanks are where the fish live, and troughs are where the plants grow. And I also have one big tank. It's about a 6,000 gallon, it's a repurposed above-ground swimming pool with some modifications made to it. And that's the primary rearing tank. And the system is pretty elaborate, and I wouldn't say that it was ideal. I hope to get into some ideal systems if our guest gets on here and joins us. But otherwise, I will just share with you guys what I've learned through my journey to be a commercial aquaponics farmer. The system currently has bass and bluegill, it's largemouth bass actually, brown bullhead catfish, and I have some black crappie in the system too. And I chose these fish. It was an agonizing process. Everybody grows tilapia in these systems because you get a very high feed to weight conversion ratio. You know, you're aiming for like 1.5 pounds of feed translating into a pound of fish, and ultimately you want 1 pound of feed to create a pound of fish. That's the most efficient way to go. And tilapia grow very quickly, but they have to have warm water. Everybody wants tilapia, but we're talking about trying to be sustainable, and I don't mean that in the Agenda 21 sense. And we're talking about moving toward being off-grid. So we need to look at other types of fish that we could raise. And also, where I live, fish are regulated by the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And you have to get a permit from them to transport live fish. Yes, it's absurd, but like a fishing license isn't even good enough. You have to have a permit. They have to evaluate the site. A biologist inspected my site about 4 times before they finally approved me to have any kind of fish, and they wouldn't approve me to have tilapia or tiger prawns or anything that they considered to be potentially invasive. And they said that tilapia could survive a winter in the Northwest. I guess some Mozambique tilapia escaped up in Idaho and started reproducing, and so they have a problem now. So I worked with the biologist and tried to select some species that were already in virtually every body of water in Southern Oregon. And we tried to figure out which ones would do the best in the system, would eat the most, produce the most waste, grow quickly, and thrive in my environment. So I've been experimenting with this for a couple of years now, trying to figure that out. And I think I've had the best results with the largemouth bass, actually, but the brown bullhead catfish are growing pretty well. I'm going to take a look here at the chat and see who's listening in right now. It looks like we have Behind the Woodshed. Shout out to Hal. Crawdad Miami, Dalnick, Desert Hawk, I Am Lone Frog, Jax Rocks, Jennifer Ayers, JJ, Joe Friday, Jules, Lady Pitbull, Salviner, Vince, Captain Gringo, Iota, and we have some anonymous listeners in there too. Thanks a lot for tuning in, you guys. I really appreciate it. This is an early show. I'm used to doing late shows after work, so it's nice being bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and having a cup of coffee here and to get to talk to you guys. And I'm going to check in here and see if my guest is in the green room yet. And looks like Murray's alarm just didn't make it, just didn't go off, I suppose. So let's back up a little bit about this aquaponics stuff. What is it really? What is this all about? It's the combination of aquaculture and hydroponics. Aquaculture is farming fish. That's, and you could raise fish in a lot of different ways. You could have them in a pond or a lake, and you could let them forage, or you could feed them. You could have some kind of a tank system, and there's also big commercial fish farms where they have fish runs, and they flush the water out with river water. There's some trout farm systems where they capture a spring and flow fresh spring water through the system to raise the fish, and will feed them a commercial feed typically to raise them. And hydroponics is where you're growing plants, you're growing vegetables and herbs and whatnot with just using water and some sort of soilless grow media, or nothing at all. And aquaponics blends the two together. And it works very nicely because fish produce some waste that work really well for plants. You've got the ammonia that they excrete, which is actually very toxic to the fish, and you have their solid waste, and which can cause some problems as well. And so the trick is to try to establish a system that takes that and converts it into a form that can be used for plants. And we rely upon bacteria to do this. There are two kinds of bacteria. Primarily, there's lots and lots of bacteria in an aquaponics system, beneficial bacteria, but in particular, we're concerned about two kinds of bacteria, Nitrosomonas and Nitrobacter. And what these do is they take the ammonia and convert the ammonia into nitrite, which is a fish toxic substance that you don't want in your system, and then into nitrate, which is beneficial for plant growth. And so this bacteria gets established in the water. You could either let it occur naturally while you're cycling your system, or you can inoculate the system where with the bacteria. You could pick it up at some fish supply stores or pet supply stores, or you could take water from a pond or from a fish tank where those colonies are established, and get that going in the system. And the bacteria is actually going to grow on the surface of the tank and on your grow media, and will help with that conversion process. And it's important to have an ample colony established, otherwise your ammonia levels and your nitrite levels will take off, and you'll have dead fish, and you won't have the nitrate that your plants need. And so there's a few benefits to growing with aquaponics. Primarily, if you're a gardener, and especially if you grow in a greenhouse, you're using soil for the most part, and it's a lot of work. If you're growing in an outdoor garden, you can you have to sometimes rotate your crops. You have to supplement the soil with compost and manure and whatnot, and typically that kind of compost doesn't work out too well inside of your greenhouse. You end up with pests and funguses and molds and things that get going in there and cause all kinds of problems. And so you end up having to get high quality potting soil, which is really expensive. I built a greenhouse in my backyard about 3 years ago, and I built some raised cedar beds, and I spent about $800 on soil, and I get a discount. I get a 30% discount because my brother owns Ladybug Indoor Gardens, and he is a sponsor of the show, so I'm going to plug his businesses. In Phoenix, Oregon, ladybugindoorgardens.com, and he owns another business called Nature's Control, naturescontrol.com, and they sell indoor gardening supplies and beneficial bugs to use for pest control. So I got all my soil going in there, and really your soil, your potting soil, is only good for one grow season. And I supplement, I make teas out of worm castings and add some other supplements like calcium and magnesium that helped that. And I stretched my soil out for about 2 to 3 grow seasons. And I noticed, in that last grow season that I really wasn't getting the best results. I was having more problems with disease, and my yields weren't as good. And so I started shoveling those beds out and getting ready to either mix up some soil with materials I have on hand. I do a lot of composting with worms, and I have a lot of worm castings, and I have sand, and you get some perlite, and some you can either use coconut coir or peat moss, wood shavings, things like that. You need something that'll hold in the moisture, and you can mix your own soil. When you're growing in a greenhouse, you don't want to just use dirt. Dirt doesn't have everything in it that your plants need to grow and thrive. And it's a lot of work mixing this stuff up, or a lot of money to just go out and buy it. And another thing I don't like, a lot of these soils that you could pick up, they're really good quality, but they're pulling a lot of materials out of the ocean, kelp and crustaceans, things like that. And I'm really not interested in using anything out of the Pacific Ocean, specifically, in my garden due to the Fukushima radiation. That's why I think it's so important to be growing crops under cover right now anyway. And so I've been shoveling out these beds, and I just decided that I want to switch the system over to aquaponics and get out of growing in soil because it's expensive and it's a lot of work, and you've got more potential problems for disease and pests. You can get there's a lot of critters that are bad for your plants that get into the soil and will eat the roots and breed in there. And so you're getting out of that when you start working with aquaponics and hydroponics. One of the problems with hydroponics is that, again, you have to have nutrients. You have to add some nutrients to the water. The plants just can't grow in water. And and a lot of those nutrients are kelp based, and and this stuff comes out of a bottle. You end up spending a lot of money buying things that come in plastic bottles, and it's very expensive. And it's if you've got a crop that yields you a lot of money, it could be worth it. But otherwise, it's not very practical, I think, for your typical backyard gardener. And so that's why I think that aquaponics is really the way to go. And also, in addition to that, you get some extra crops out of it. You're not just getting vegetables and herbs. You're also getting some protein. You're getting your fish out of it, assuming that you didn't kill them. And that's what I'm hoping to get into here is, how to culture your fish and help to keep them healthy. So let's check in on the green room again and see if our guest has popped in. And I'm not seeing him in here. And it looked like he had about 3 Skype accounts, and I just sent him requests to all of them. I'm just going to try calling one and see what happens. So, looks like we don't have him here. Also, I wanted to remind you guys that I have open phones today. So, any of you are more than welcome to call in with questions or comments. If you want to talk about your experiences with this, have at it. Give me a call. I'll pretty much talk about any subject, but I'd like to stay within the realm of farming, gardening, and aquaponics in particular. Also, with aquaponics, one of the great things with aquaponics is that it is sustainable. It uses fewer resources. Your growing time, nutrients, land, and water are much lower compared to standard farming, gardening with soil culture. I'm looking at a few stats here, and It depends on how well your system is designed, but you're looking at 60 to 80% less water use, 300% less nutrients, and a lot less time. Your land use is about 15% of that of standard soil culture, and your growing time is reduced too, and your crop yields are increased. And of course, this is going to depend upon your climate and what you're growing and how well you maintain your system. I get a lot of questions from people, and they want to know, how much food could this produce for my family? And it's really, it's hard to say. It's going to depend upon. And we have a call here. Vincent, how are you doing?
Great. Hey, Jim. How are you?
Excellent. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, this is an awesome show. I've been so looking forward to this. This is great.
Yeah, me too. Thanks. And thank you for promoting the show for us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So, hey, I wanted to talk some about how you have those black army. No, what are they? The black fly larvae.
Oh yes, and the black soldier
so
flies. Yes.
You produce those in compost. Now you have a system where when they pupate, they kind of come up a ramp or something, and you collect them. So I was wondering if you could explain how you create the food source.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, that's one of the great challenges, as we start talking about the efficiency of aquaponics, and how it doesn't use a lot of resources compared to other methods of farming and gardening. It does require some inputs. One of those inputs, of course, is food. You have to feed your fish something. For the most part, people use commercial fish feeds. Purina produces several different feeds. They have a line called Aquamax, and that's designed for a variety of fish, from game fish to tilapia, and they have different size pellets and whatnot for different size fish, so fish need to be fed a pellet that's, at least smaller than their mouth. And the problem is that this isn't sustainable. Most of these feeds are based on GMO corn, GMO soy, and fish meal, and they're totally not sustainable. The Pacific fisheries were stressed anyway, and now they're collapsing. There's virtually no industrial fish now, and like the sardine population of the Pacific is pretty much gone. And the demand was so great for industrial fish that aquaculture couldn't even expand. And so we have a collapsing Pacific Ocean, and then we have an increased demand for an alternate protein source, which is farming fish, and then we're reliant upon the industrial fish to feed the fish, and it's not practical. It's not sustainable, and you'd have all the energy and resources going into catching the fish and processing the fish, rendering the fish into fish meal. And so we have to have alternate trying to come up with something else that we could feed our fish. And I found that the black soldier fly is a pretty good alternative. You've got this fly that has larvae that eat compost. They feed on compost. They're voracious eaters. And they're basically big maggots. And the black soldier fly is native to virtually most every continent in the world. And in North America, it's native. They're in South America. They're in Australia. They're in Europe. They're all over the place. And you'll often see these in your compost piles. You might see these big black waspy-looking flies around, or you'll find their grubs in your compost. And they're usually, when you find them in your compost, they look like big grubs, either kind of a creamy color, or when they're in their pupa state, they're a dark color. And those are 67% protein, and the rest is lipid. They're very healthy for the fish, but I've found that the fish don't like to eat the pupa, and this is the whole problem with raising the black soldier fly larvae for the fish feed, you have to have a good way to harvest them. You don't want to just be picking through the compost. It's a lot of work, and you need something you can just scoop up. The cool thing about the soldier fly is that they have a very predictable life cycle, and because of that, they're suited for farming and production. And so, like, I built a system where I'm able to breed the flies, hatch the eggs, culture the larvae, and then place them in compost bins. And then I do a couple of things with the larvae. I will skim them off the surface. They'll usually feed on the surface of the compost, and skim them off and rinse them out in a colander, and have basically a black soldier fly risotto for my fish, and they absolutely love it. As they get into their pre-pupa stage, they'll want to crawl out of the compost and go someplace dark where they could pupate, and then they'll hatch as a fly. And this is a very predictable process, and if you design your composting system right, and I'll get into this in more detail in another show, but they'll actually self-harvest. They'll crawl out and they fall into another bin or bucket, and then you've got your pupa that you could use for your next batch of flies, but you could render that into a feed. Most fish, I think tilapia will eat the pupa. Murray claims that he hasn't had very good luck with the pupa, and he kind of complains about the whole process. I think he has a biopod, but I've had good results. What's that?
Let me ask you now. You're raising brim or the perch, and they're pretty good eaters. Now, do they take to the larvae pretty good then?
Yeah, I raise bluegill, brown bullhead, catfish, and largemouth bass, and I have some black crappie. All of the fish really like the larva. None of them will eat the pupa, so I end up having to grind the pupa up. And I'll grind them up, and I've got some ingredients I mix in. I basically make kind of like a cookie dough type material. It's kind of gross, but then I'll make little pellets out of it. And the fish love it. All of the fish will eat it, and that's the only way that they'll eat the pupa. The larvae, they'll just eat straight. I just skim it off the top of the composters, rinse it off, and feed it to the fish. The only fish that are really picky are the crappie, and I am phasing out the crappie. They're very, very picky eaters, and I can only get them to eat worms for the most part. And I have composting worms. I raise a lot of worms, and I'll harvest them to also feed the fish. But the crappie will only eat those guys, and so it's a lot of work. And in the wintertime, the soldier flies are dormant, and the worms slow down. They're not as productive, and so you do need alternate food sources. And so I do have to rely upon some commercial feeds in the winter months for about half the year. I really need to rely upon those commercial feeds. When my soldier fly colony gets big enough, I'll be able to harvest enough pupa and render that into feed to carry me over through the winter. Or I can freeze dry the larva. Another interesting thing about the larva, Vince, and the pupa is that they're 67% protein, but the rest is lipid. It's an oil, and there's some YouTubes about this. There's some people that have taken the pupa and they freeze dry it, and then they press it and get the oil out. Then you have the oil. If you have enough pupa, you could produce oil that you could use for biofuel. And then you use the solid material for fish food. And so you get, and you're getting this from garbage. You're taking rubbish. Like, for example, a few blocks away from me is a company called Pickle Planet, and they make fermented foods like sauerkraut and kimchi. And they produce hundreds and hundreds of pounds of veggie scrap every week. And I go over there with my pickup, and I load it up. They put it in boxes for me, and I load it up, and that's what I use for composting. I have a really big composting operation. I'll make a video for it for you guys, and that's what I'm using to produce, a huge amount of my fish feeds, but I'm also getting some other beneficial things from this. I'm getting worm castings, which I could make teas with the castings and add those teas back to my aquaponics system. That gives me more nutrients. If you're doing any kind of container growing, you can mix it into your soil. I could sell the castings. And then you also get a liquid leachate that comes off the composting systems for both the worms and the flies. With the soldier flies, that leachate is really high in ammonia, and it'll kill your plants if you add it direct. But with aquaponics, that'll dilute it, and you could add it straight into the system, and your nitrifying bacteria in the system will convert that leachate into nitrate, which is beneficial for your plants. And there's other elements in there, and microbes that are good for your plants as well. And so
I'd like to ask you a little bit about the balance right there, and as far as you're using the water from the fish and the nitrates build up in there. Now, how much balance you needed between plants and the fish, and then when you got into like large numbers of fish, if you wanted to produce a lot, and you'd have perhaps some ponds on the ground, and then to filter all that, would it be like a filter at the end, say like growing some rice or something in a big operation, and then be able to harvest that rice and add it back into the insect food?
Yeah, well, there are some ancient farming methods where they'd use fish and would pull the water from the fish ponds and use that for irrigation. This isn't a new thing at all. You could usually get... it depends on the size of the system. On a small home system, you'll usually want to, like for your tank volume, you'll go like 1-to-1. But the bigger the system, you can get up to like 4-to-1. You get up into a bigger commercial size systems, and so you could have 4 times the grow space, for your grow beds to your tank capacity. And the amazing thing is how low your nitrates can be and still grow plants. I've been able to grow plants down to about 5 to 10 parts per million of nitrate. That's insanely low. I mean, it's incredible. I can't believe it. At first I'd worry about it, and I go, I need to add something here, or I need more fish in the system, and to get that nitrate level up. And I've still been able to produce plenty of plants with that low of a nitrate level, and it's because a lot of that activity is happening around the roots. It's happening in the root zone, and also in your aquaponics system, if you have a flood and drain system where you're using gravel culture, for example, or aeroponics, you're getting a lot of oxygen, and that is going to encourage a lot of plant growth. So you're going to get greater yields from that with fewer and fewer inputs. Now you can pull off like your some of your water. Sometimes I'll pull off some of my water and go and use it to water other plants, or I'll fill up jugs and I'll water my house plants with it, and it works just fine. And as far as the nitrates building up, your nitrate levels can go up really, really high. They could get up to, say, 180 parts per million. It's not going to hurt your fish. The nitrate's not fish toxic. However, I have read some things, where it can affect the flavor of the fish. That, like, for example, some people don't like the flavor of catfish. They say it has a muddy flavor. It's possible that is due to a high nitrate level in the water. That was something I was hoping to get into with Murray. But my research has shown that the super high nitrate levels can affect the flavor of the fish, and so if your nitrate levels are getting way up there, in that 160 or 180 parts per million range, you could start pulling off some of that water and topping up with some fresh water and dilute it down a bit, or catch some fish and cook it up and see how it tastes. And if the flavor's fine, I wouldn't worry too much about it.
So what kind of pumping system are you using to move your water then? You're saying you kind of have your fish tank above, and then drain through your medium for your plants, and then through a gravel filter, and then back up to the fish?
Yeah, there's several ways to go about this. Let's take my home system. I just have a 1/6 horsepower sump pump, which is a little bit overkill, but it works pretty well, turns the water over quickly, and so that'll pump water up from the sump tank into the grow troughs, and part of the water overflows back into the sump tank, and then the rest goes into the fish tanks, and that'll circulate through. The solids get picked up by the system. They get dropped into the sump tank and picked up and deposited in the grow beds. However, I'm running very, very high density, and there's a lot of waste, and things can go bad really quickly when you're running a high density. And, if you're running, like, say, 1.5 fish per gallon, something like that, that's a lot of fish, and things can go bad. You could end up with too many solids in the system, and you'll start having gill problems. You'll have solid material not getting filtered out, and it starts decomposing. Gases start building up that can be fish toxic, and the fish might not be able to see their food very well, and they're not going to be happy, and you're gonna see your oxygen levels falling down because you have this material decomposing in the system, oxidizing in the system. It can be really problematic. And what I've found is with a lot of these systems is that they don't adequately filter the solids. And you usually will have to get into your tank with a broom or something and stir up the material that's settled at the bottom to get it to be picked up by the pump and put in the grow beds. And that material will start to build up in the media. If you're using, say, gravel or clay beads, some cases, some people use sand even, but that material will start to build up, and eventually it'll start to clog up the system, and you'll have to change it out or flush it out somehow. And so there's a shift that's going from just using the gravel media. There's a shift to having additional filtration systems, or getting out of the media altogether and just using a method called deep water culture, or also wicking beds as well. And I'm going more and more in this direction of getting out of the gravel culture and just doing the deep water culture. So in order to do that, you have to be able to process those solids outside of the system, and so you need to be able to settle and collect those solids, mineralize and degas them, and that's usually done by using a couple barrels that are outside of the system with a filter media in there. It could either be like plastic netting or brushes. There's some products out there on the market that are basically just made out of they look like hunks of black plastic pipe with holes in them, and that's used to settle out the solids and to nitrify the ammonia. And so I set up. I was having problems with solid removals in my home system, so I made a very simple filter to help that out. What I did, I took a 5-gallon Home Depot bucket and some deer netting and a very, very small water pump that I picked up for about $8 at Ladybug Indoor Gardens. And then I made a U-shaped pipe that's a siphon, and I established a siphon between the bucket and my fish tanks, and it needs to be at the same level. And as you all know, water finds its own level. So if the pump stops, it just stops. It won't overflow or anything. And so the pump pumps the water out of the bucket back into the tank. The siphon pulls the water from the tank back into the bucket, and that helps to remove some of the solids. And then they just stick to the filter media that's in the bucket. So that was a very cheap, easy way to build a nice little water filter for my fish tank. And it's working really well, and my fish seem a lot happier. We're dealing with the solids a lot better, and this is critical. And like in my commercial system that I modeled after Will Allen's system, I have a similar problem with getting the solids out of the system. What they don't flow through and get picked up by the pump. And I've got a pretty substantial pump on that system. It's an inline pump, and it doesn't pull those solids out enough, and so sometimes I have to go in and vacuum out some of those tanks to pull those solids out, because they'll start gassing in the system, and I could have fish deaths, and I'll smell kind of a sulfury smell, see some bubbling coming up, and I know I've got an issue. And so processing solids is really the critical problem with aquaculture and aquaponics, is getting that material out of there.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if like a settling tank, and then at the bottom of where you drain your fish water off, where you might have solids accumulating in there, if you have a bottom drain out on that, and let's say like a 55-gallon drum, so that would be like a 75 fish capacity then in that area.
Yeah, I wouldn't take that chance. I would scale that down. Like I wouldn't go. I wouldn't go more than one fish per gallon, and that's pushing it. I mean, you really, as they get big, you might have to add another tank and scale that down. I work a lot. I don't have a lot of time, so I try to keep things very simple. My home system, I've got it so that I just grab another poly barrel, establish a siphon from the new poly barrel to the next one on the line, and then I've got my water return line on a hose, and I just move the hose over and strap it down to the poly barrel so it doesn't fall out, and so I can just add another barrel to my line just like that. It's pretty simple, but you could put a drain on the bottom so that you can pull off those solids as they settle, and you could even have your water return so that they're causing a little bit of a current to cause it to swirl, and those solid materials will start to settle out in the bottom, and then you could draw them off with a valve on the bottom. But you'd have to elevate your poly barrel. You'd have to set it up on something so that you could draw it out. And you could buy some that are canicular, on the bottom for drawing off solids like that. It just depends upon how much money you want to spend and what's available to you. I have an abundant source of poly barrels, and I have a yard full of different kinds of containers, from poly barrels and totes and fiberglass containers, and I use them myself, and I sell them to people who are setting up hydroponic and aquaponic systems, or need water, fuel storage, whatever. And so I always have a lot of these. I recycle them from a company that makes organic hospital grade alcohols, and so I have a lot to work with, but none of them are canicular. So you have to get creative when it comes to dealing with those solids, because they will build up.
In comparison for raising your fish, the different fish that you do raise, from the bass and the bluegill and so forth, what is the time, the growth rate, and you said about 1.5 pounds per one pound of fish of feed?
That's really that's really your ideal growth rate. It's going to depend upon how much heat you use. It is expensive to heat your water through the winter. Like someone like you, Vince, I mean, you're very creative. You could build like a rocket mass heater, and have some kind of heat exchanger to warm your water or something like that. Otherwise, you're going to have to use some sort of an electric heater or gas heater. I use a combination of a gas heater, and in my home system I use electric, but at my farm I use a combination of gas and solar. I have solar water heating panels on the roof of my shop, and like this time of the year, that's all I use. If you could keep your water temperature up around the 70s, your fish are going to grow very quickly, and you'll be able to go from like fry to plate-sized fish in 6 to 9 months. I'd say 9 months is reasonable. With a lot of fish, like your bass, those guys eat a lot. Bluegill can take a little longer. I haven't figured out why, but just some fish are more aggressive than others, especially with the bluegill. There's a big variation in size I've found with my bluegill, and some are just aggressive, voracious eaters, and others are more shy. And there's a massive difference in the rate of growth. What I'll do is I'll start selectively breeding these guys, and we'll see if their offspring, are the same. But I've had the best results with the bass and with the catfish. They have big mouths, so they're flexible eaters. They eat a lot, but if they don't have to have really warm water year round. Say if you're off grid, you're really going to have to think carefully about the use of your resources. So maybe it won't be practical for you to heat your water through the winter, or maybe you're only going to be able to keep your water around, say, 55 degrees, which would be warm enough to grow some greens. You can still grow some lettuce and maybe some spinach or something if you're in a greenhouse environment. Collards, absolutely, you'd be able to grow those in very cold temperatures, and your fish will still live, and they're going to grow a lot more slowly. So now, one thing that you could do is you could have like your pond or your tank in some sort of a greenhouse, or you could put a dome structure over the top of it, and that's going to extend your growing season without having to heat the water. You're going to get solar gain from that water, and that would help a lot. And that would be the preferred method, I think, for an off-grid situation. Another thing I've been experimenting with is solar power system. I built a model system last summer for a local farmer's market, and I built it out of a poly barrel and a 6 amp DC pump and my 45 watt Harbor Freight solar power system, and that it worked just fine. I mean, just even without the solar panels on there, the battery would have run that pump for like 14 hours without a charge. So I'm leaning in the direction of going completely off grid with my aquaponics systems. I want to have DC air pumps and use air lifts instead of water pumps. That way you're oxygenating the water and using the least amount of energy possible. And so that's what I'm getting into. I think this is the next phase for aquaponics and aquaculture, especially for off-grid applications. Going in that direction, I'm going to be doing more experiments with that, and I'll start out with my outside filtration systems, and I'll be running those instead of using water pumps. I'll be using air lifts instead, and that's really simple. What you're doing is you're bubbling air up through your return line, and that's making the water lighter, and that will cause the water to travel up through the line and return. And then so you have your airlift return on one side and your siphon on the other, and that's how you establish your circulation. And there are some DC air pumps out there, and I think this is the key: is we start moving more and more off grid, looking at applications like that, so that we can move that water. We're not dependent upon the grid. If you're highly stocked in your system, and say there's a lightning storm, your power goes out. I have some tanks that are so highly stocked that if the power went out for even an hour, I'm going to have some problems. I'm going to have some fish gasping for air, and you need to have some alternate ways to oxygenate that system. I would like to just design systems from the get-go to be off the grid, and we're probably going to see power prices explode, as the government starts super regulating and closing down coal power plants, and even in the Northwest where we're hydroelectric, we'll still see our rates go up. Aquaponics is very dependent upon the grid. You've got air pumps and you have water pumps, and we have to move the water. We have to oxygenate the water. So we have to start looking at other ways to accomplish that. I think it's very feasible with the systems that I've been studying, and with my own experiments. I've proven that I can, on a small scale, build an off-grid system that works really well. And I'm working on a new system at home that'll be entirely off-grid, and I'm going to try to power that, including some supplemental LED lighting, off of my 400 watt solar power system. It's 400 watts right now. But this is where I think a lot of efforts need to go in order for aquaponics to prove out to be a good off-grid food production system. We have to start looking at that. Otherwise, just growing outdoors has its advantages, because you just need water and some nutrients in there, and if the power goes out, you're not losing your crops.
I'd like to add someone or for some clarification. Now, with the fish, they'll tolerate a lower temperature water, and then you need warmer water for your plants. So basically, yeah. I guess if you could couple your water to the ground for the heat sink there, and then start out at about 55 degrees, along with moving it through black plastic pipe for warming it, and there's be some other great ideas like Fresnel lens and creating a giant magnifying glass and getting a heat sink from right there, hitting it into like a ground mass there, a big bunch of rocks or something like that, and going through there. There'd probably be a lot of the being on the grid, and
yeah.
I'd like to just end up, hey, I'm saying here, what a great show this is, man. I'm really glad that you're doing this. It's going to be a lot of information.
I think we're going to have a lot of fun with this one, Vince.
Absolutely. Hey, I'm out west for a year here, so I definitely still want to get up there and spend some time learning from you and helping you out, and hopefully maybe by fall or something.
Hey, there's always a ton of work to be done. I have a lot of people that stop by. Ashland is a big tourist town, and people will contact me, and they'll be over for a visit, and they'll want to spend a few days working on the farm, and so I'll have volunteers come in and do some stuff. For the most part, it seems like after a few days working on the farm, they realize they're not cut out for farm work. It sounds glamorous. It sounds like a lot of fun, but it's hard work when it gets down to it, and sometimes it's downright boring. Processing compost and dealing with flies and giant grubs and worms, it grosses out some people, but others are well suited for the work and are used to it. But we get a few city slickers that think that it would be cool to work on an aquaponics farm. So I'm more than happy to give them a shot. But I think you've got a pretty clear understanding what hard work is all about. So it's especially harvest. Since I'm growing vertically, even harvesting basils is kind of like working in an orchard. You're up there on a ladder. You harvest these things, and up where it's really hot. My busy days are Thursdays and Fridays, where I'm filling orders for local restaurants. We have a lot of really nice local restaurants, and they're my primary customers. So I produce basils and microgreens, and then fish when fish are ready, for them. So it's really great. If you decide to do this, what I'm trying to encourage people to do is be nano farmers, and so get some things set up however you want to grow them, and produce enough for yourself for what you need, and then sell your excess either to nearby restaurants, go talk to the restaurant owners, or go to the farmers markets, and reach out, and you can make a little extra income there, and you're also producing really, really healthy food for your local market. You're making it accessible to others. You could also, donate some of it, to the needy. A common problem with organic food is the cost of it, and a lot of people who don't have a lot of money don't have access to it. So you can make a huge difference just making some donations to a local soup kitchen or Salvation Army or something along those lines, so that you're giving other people access to healthy food and making your community stronger and helping people stay healthy and strong. But if we had small networks of nano farms coordinating, working together, you could have small industries in your community, and that's something I'm trying to do. I hit the farmers markets and I try to meet other farmers and I see what kind of crops they're growing, and I reach out to them. So I can't grow everything, and I might have a request for something, so I try to find somebody who's growing it locally and that I could source to. And this is a way where we're creating a really good network of farmers and helping our own economy, keeping the food local, keeping it healthy and organic, and ultimately lowering the costs too. As there's more of this food available, the cost will go down to the consumer. The rest of us will have to make up our profit through volume, of course, but hopefully we'll see demand increase. And we're coming up to the end of the show here. And Vincent, you're welcome to come on anytime you like. I'd like to get into rocket stoves and rocket mass heaters with you sometime. So I'm really hoping to build one.
I appreciate it. You do a lot of good stuff, man. I'll see you back on the radio.
So you guys have been listening to the very first episode of Off Grid Journey. I've been your host, Drew Lamb, and I'll be back again next Sunday. Thanks a lot for tuning in.